Amen. Dear friends all over the world, my name is Ronen Be'eri. I'm a cardiologist by vocation, and I am chairman of the steering committee of the Israel Religious Action Center of the Reform Movement, the public and legal advocacy arm of the Reform Movement in Israel. With me is an extremely distinguished panel: Anat Hoffman, Executive Director of IRAC, Rabbi Noah Satat, Director of IRAC, Advocate Oli Erez Lachovsky, Director of the IRAC Legal Department, Advocate Nicole Maor, Director of the Legal Aid Center for Olim, and last but not least, Ofer Erez, Director of Public Policy and Outreach. We would like to thank Artseinu for honoring us with opening session of this very important Insight 2020 seminar. The State of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace, as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principle of the Charter of the United Nations. This is a quote from Israel's Declaration of Independence. So is Israel a democratic state? Is it a Jewish state? Which of all these, if at all, is more important or prominent? Or are they equally important and independent from one another? Does being a Jewish state entail that Judaism is the state religion and governs all decisions? Does Judaism implies necessarily the exclusivity of the Orthodox interpretation? This is the lines of which IRAC is battling. You shall hear about the legal, public, political, and social struggles that face our very dedicated staff every day. You shall hear about IRAC's great successes that have changed Israeli society. And you also will hear about the challenges IRAC still faces. You shall hear all of our action stem from our Jewish reform beliefs, and you shall hear it from the real heroes that make it happen. The third chapter of Ethics of the Fathers say, it is not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it. It is on this note that I proudly pass the mic to Rabbi Noah Satat, IRAC's director. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Hello, friends. We are so grateful to be here with you, and we are so grateful for the great work that you have been doing and that you will do for the Jewish people, for Israel, for democracy in the coming days. As you're partnering with us in thinking about reshaping the Israeli political and social map, we wanted to share with you a little bit about what we're doing right now to promote democracy, equality, and freedom of religion in Israel. I will ask each one of the panelists to speak in a few minutes, but we are very, very eager for this to be a conversation. So please do not hesitate. If you have a question, a comment, a thought, if anything is unclear, please let us know in the comments, and we will try to address everything that you ask. In terms of what we're going to do next, what we thought is that we would ask every one of our participants to speak briefly about what they're focusing on right now in their work and what gives them hope at this time. So I would love to start with my hero and my boss, Anat Hoffman, who will share a little bit about our work.
Toda Noah, shalom everybody. I'd like to start with just saying that Israel is not dealing with Israel, making Israel the state that we can be proud of is not a spectator sport. You are all participants. We are all partners in this endeavor, which I believe is the most important Jewish project of our lifetime. The Jews attempting to have a state on this planet and navigate it according to Jewish values. And the dialogue of what are the Jewish values of the Jewish state is what the Israel Religious Action Center is all about. And no other religious movement in Israel, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, has invested in an elaborate human rights organization as the reform movement had in establishing the Israel Religious Action Center. Some people have original thoughts every day. I'm not one of them. In fact, I haven't had an original thought in a while, but I have the second best talent. I can choose people who have original thoughts, and I can identify original thinking. The panel you're about to hear from consists of top professionals who are actually redesigning, mending the Jewish state. Jewish state, as you know, has done beautifully, more than any other country who is 73 years old. We really put to shame everybody else our age in technology, in agriculture, in music, and so many things. But religiously, when it comes to the relationship between religion and state, how can I say it? We're quite bankrupt. We have not done well. The Orthodox monopoly over all religious services in Israel has been bad, first and foremost, to Orthodoxy. It's bad for Judaism. It's bad for the state of Israel. What Judaism needs and thrives is diversity and good competition. And may the best rabbi win. And may the best form of marriage and divorce and kashrut and Shabbat. There's so many ways to be Jewish. And Israel should be the hub of where, really, the Club Med for the Jewish soul. Israel should be where you can really have a supermarket of Jewish religious experiences. This is not the situation right now, and the Israel Religious Action Center is working to mend it. I believe that Israel is way too important to be left to the Israelis, and I'm delighted that all of you are all over the world listening to me right now, and I want you to know I see you as partners. Without you, we can't succeed. I don't think the world will give us another chance at having a sovereign Jewish state. This is our one chance, and I think we must succeed in doing that. What worries me right now in Israel, to your question, Rabbi Sadat, is religious extremism, zealotry. I think in the year 560 BC and in the year 70 AC, we saw how a Jewish zealotry can bring about the destruction of the Jewish people. And we are seeing now some zealotry in Israel that should be very disturbing. Religious zealots. There's a way to stop it, and we must do it for our own sake. What gives me hope? The staff you're about to hear from, the panelists you're about to hear from, people who are in the trenches every day, making Israel live up to her own dream. So I encourage you to ask us questions, make comments. Conversation is what it's all about. In fact, gives us a boost of encouragement and feeling that we have partners in this faith of making Israel better. So don't hesitate to ask us.
Thank you, Anat. And so I know that many of you know Anat, and one of our goals in this panel was for you to get to know some of our leaders and our champions who are less known in the movement. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to present them to you now. And I'll start with my colleague and my friend, Oriela Zlachowski, who directs our legal department. She is so focused. She is so smart. I would invite all of you to listen to her in court because it's one of my favorite things. But she speaks so quickly that it's very hard for me to understand her Hebrew. So I'm delighted to present her to you so that she can share what she's working on right now, the successes and the challenges, and what gives her hope.
Thank you so much, Noah. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. So I want to really give you just a taste of some of the issues we're handling with, some of the success stories, and lastly, what I'm hopeful about. So basically, Anat spoke about the Orthodox monopoly and the fact that we are working to make Israel a place where every Jew has an equal place. And the first area I want to talk about is really our fight for freedom of religion and for equality of the non-Orthodox streams, majorly the Reform movement. We've actually had some great achievements in the last years. We have managed to break the Orthodox monopoly, whether it's on the issue of funding religious services. The State of Israel has started to fund salaries of our rabbis, of Reform rabbis, for 7 years now. This is not an easy task. For instance, this year, because of the political mess and the fact that there is no approved budget, the government has not approved the budget for 2020. The state said that they actually are not going to pay the salaries of our rabbis this year. We had to take them for the fourth time to court in recent years, and they changed their minds, and now they said, okay, we'll fund you this year as well. So each year we have a new struggle, but the principle is there. The state recognized the fact that they cannot fund only Orthodox rabbis, and they do fund our rabbis all across the country, which is a major achievement. They have also started funding synagogue buildings built for Reform congregations around the country. This is funded by the Ministry of Religious Services, which is a ministry controlled traditionally by the ultra-Orthodox Shas party. So this was a major breakthrough, and some of our congregations operate from buildings that have been built with state funds, which is a very nice improvement that has been going on just in the last couple of years. We have also managed to break the Orthodox monopoly on the issue of kashrut. We basically broke the monopoly of the chief rabbinate, and today there are other bodies which give supervision kashrut to different restaurants all around the country. And we're working to do this on the issue of marriage as well. There's still a long way to go. And of course, there is the issue of the Kotel, the Western Wall. Unfortunately, there is still not a truly egalitarian plaza at the wall. We've been leading a very long struggle together with Women of the Wall and the conservative movement. Actually, in 3 weeks, we're going to have another hearing before the Supreme Court, before an extended panel of the court. This hearing was supposed to take place a year ago, but because of all the elections that we had in the previous year, it has been postponed over and over and over again. Hopefully, we'll have a breakthrough in the coming weeks. So that's just really a taste of what we've been doing on the issue of freedom of religion. What we also focus on is trying to make sure that people do not use the Jewish religion to infringe the right on others, whether it is women, LGBTQ people, or Arabs. We have been fighting exclusion of women and gender segregation in the public sphere for the past 15 years. IRAC has been a true pioneer in this fighting this area. We have managed to abolish or reach a Supreme Court decision which abolished forced gender segregation on public transportation. This has been a major ruling that the Supreme Court gave a couple of years ago. We are still assisting women who are being sent to the back of the bus once in a while, or even we're just now working on a case of a woman where the driver did not allow her to board the bus at all because she was a woman, and he said there are only vacant seats only for men. So these are things that still happen once in a while, and we take those cases to court in order to make sure that the bus drivers and the bus companies know that this is illegal and they should pay damages to women whose rights are infringed. We've had a major success also in a class action suit that we filed against a radio station, an ultra-Orthodox radio station, which did not allow women to be heard on air at all for 2.5 years, a station that got a license from the state to broadcast and used it to exclude women from its broadcasts. We have made them change their policy, and today this ultra-Orthodox station has female anchors, and they allow, of course, women on air. And also the court ordered them to pay 1 million shekels in damages aimed at empowering ultra-Orthodox women who were excluded from the broadcast of this show. So this was also a very important decision, a landmark decision, the issue of exclusion of women and discrimination in general in Israel. We're actually today running another class action suit against IKEA for publishing a catalog aimed at the ultra-Orthodox sector, which does not show any pictures of women at all. So it's a catalog which has only pictures of men and kids. No women or girls are on this catalog, and we have filed a suit against them, and we're at the beginning of this process. So we are hopeful that this will turn out positively as well. And the last area I want to talk about is our fight against racism and racist incitement. We are fighting mostly against people who use the Jewish religion to incite against Arabs, to incite racism and violence. In Israel, this is a criminal offense, but the Attorney General is very reluctant to press charges, especially against rabbis using the Jewish religion to incite to racism. We've had great success last year when we managed to disqualify candidates of the racist Jewish Power Party from running to the Knesset. The Supreme Court accepted our petition and decided that 3 candidates are not allowed to run for the Knesset because they incite racism. This was the first time the court disqualifies candidates on this basis since Meir Kahane was disqualified in 1992. So it was the first time we managed to do it after 30 years. So it was a major breakthrough, and it sent a very clear message that in Israel's parliament, in the parliament of the Jewish and democratic state, there is no place for people who incite to racism so bluntly. And also very recently, just a couple of weeks ago, the Supreme Court accepted our petition against Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu. He's a rabbi who operates as a rabbi of Safed, a city rabbi who is employed by the state. We all pay his salary, and he uses his post to incite consistently against Arabs and against other groups as well. We have been filing many legal proceedings against him for almost 2 decades, and this time the court accepted our petition and decided that he should be under disciplinary proceedings because as a state employee he's not allowed to say racist remarks or other remarks which are inappropriate for a person who is part of the state public service. And this was again a very important message saying that the public service cannot tolerate such horrible remarks. What I'm hopeful about, I think that all those legal struggles, they're Sisyphean, long legal struggles, but the success at the end, of course, makes me very optimistic. We try to look ahead, not a year or 2, but rather a decade ahead. And when we look back, we see we've made a lot of progress. Also, I think the fact that public opinion in Israel has changed dramatically over the last decade makes me hopeful, whether it's on issues of religion and state. The Israeli public supports in very high numbers equality for the reform movement, freedom of choice in marriage, public transportation in Shabbat, and basically giving you more than one way to be Jewish. And also the issue of equal rights for women and fighting exclusion of women from the public sphere. This is something that did not interest the Israeli public at all, only a decade ago or even 5 years ago. And today the situation is completely different, and people are enraged by it, understand that this is illegal and that this should be challenged. Also, the fact that we have cooperation with other people. For instance, we represent a group of Orthodox women from Bet Shemesh. They are Orthodox, modern Orthodox, and they have been fighting with us against the humiliating modesty signs which hung on the streets of Bet Shemesh. It has been a very interesting relationship, and we sort of learned together how important it is for moderates to cooperate against zealots, against extremists, and it doesn't matter what our religious affiliation is. And I think this cooperation is really makes me optimistic. And last but not least, I think the support that we receive both from people here and from people all over the world really gives us energy to continue to fight for a more democratic and just Israel.
Thank you, Oli. So I'm sure you all have many questions. I've seen some on the chat. And I'm welcoming more questions or comments as you have them. Next, I'd like to introduce you to the most wow, the word escapes me. The employee who's been with Iraq the longest, Nicole Mao, who has helped 100,000 new Israelis, 100,000 people she's helped during her time at Iraq, with just constant care and attention to each and every one of our clients, allowing them to live new and fair and equal lives in Israel as much as we can with the Israeli immigration laws. So please, Nicole, please tell us about what you're focusing on right now and what gives you hope.
Thanks, Noah. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I think when I started working in Iraq many, many years ago, Iraq thought that they'd been employing me for about a year. The aim was in the early 90s to help new immigrants make aliyah and dealing with the Israeli bureaucracy, with the huge numbers of olim that came in from the former Soviet Union and from Ethiopia. They thought that, okay, it'll take about a year, a couple of years, and we'll be able to make a balance between the difficulties that the new immigrants deal with in being absorbed into Israeli society and the work that the Israel movement can do as part of its ideology of tikkun olam, of making Israel a better place and a more open place to accept the olim. Unfortunately I think for the reform movement and for all of us, they couldn't fire me after 2 years, and I'm still here after about 30 years. But the issues of absorption and immigration into Israel are still there, and there are still so many immigrants that unfortunately need our help, specifically immigrants who have converted and are asking to make aliyah on the basis of their conversion. Many of you know me for the whole issues of conversion around the world, especially non-Orthodox conversion, because as Orly mentioned before, when the Ministry of Religion is dominated by the Shas party, so the Ministry of Interior, which is the ministry that deals with all matters of immigration, is also dominated by the Shas party. And they're not really in love with the concept of a non-Orthodox conversion, to put it mildly. And they try and make difficulties wherever they go. We've had to petition the Supreme Court for years, and we're still going, and to try and get full rights for non-Orthodox conversions performed both in Israel and outside of Israel. Just recently, they tried to put another spanner in the works and have decided that any reform or conservative or even Orthodox community outside of Israel that was founded by converts will not be any conversion performed in such a community won't be recognized because they don't want any more second generation converts coming to live in Israel if their first conversion was if the community was formed by converts from our movements. So we're petitioned the Supreme Court on that matter, and we are in fact working together with Orthodox communities and conservative communities. Really concept of a non-Orthodox conversion outside of Israel that was founded by converts because they don't want any more. Something's happening. I'm hearing myself double. Anyway, so we're working on the question of conversion. We're also working on the question of who is a Jew, not just in relation to conversion. Again, the Interior Ministry is trying to limit the whole concept of a person who was born Jewish and then didn't have an active Jewish life during their lives. Are they still considered Jewish under the law of return? It's hard to believe that these questions are being raised, but they are being raised today. That's really relevant questions in the American Jewish community where there's a lot of assimilation, but just the fact that a person doesn't go to synagogue every week doesn't mean that they're no longer Jewish. There are many issues that they're dealing with of young people in the former Soviet Union who, when the gates were opened and their parents were worried that Jews would be discriminated against, they did formal baptism ceremonies for these children so that they wouldn't be known as Jewish. Then the children want to come and make aliyah, and the state says no, they're no longer Jewish, they're Christian. When of course they'd never stepped foot in a church. They hadn't stepped foot in a synagogue either, but they definitely weren't Christian. But in addition to all these matters, we also are making sure that there's no discrimination between single-sex marriages and heterosexual marriages, because under the law of return that wasn't clear. So we fought for for equality on that matter. We're also giving humanitarian assistance to battered women who are really the lowest on the lowest in terms of their ability to survive in a society which is still a very male-dominated society, especially in the field of immigration. We have many, many cases that we take on almost pro bono of women who are foreigners who are married to Israelis, had Israeli-born children, and then suffered violence at the hand of their Israeli partners. And the Interior Ministry has said that these women must leave the country together with their Israeli children. And we will fight those matters, and we've won up until the Supreme Court and back. Even just today, we won a decision of a woman whose child is still in hospital. She's a 6-year-old Israeli daughter. She's in hospital because she has all sorts of orthopedic issues. And the Interior Ministry said, well, there's no reason why they can't continue their treatment in Russia just because the woman left her husband because of domestic violence. And we won today in court that the woman and her child obviously are allowed to stay in Israel. And we will fight those matters and fight the matters of widows who've lost their Israeli husbands. And the Interior Ministry says, well, there's no reason for you to stay in Israel, and we will fight for them as well. As Noah said, we have assisted more than 100,000 people over the last few years. Over the last 30 years. It would be nice if that number were reduced, but people are still wanting to make aliyah. And I think the second part of the question was, what gives you hope? Well, when my clients apply to join the Reform Rabbinate, when another client is accepted as a top physicist in the country, when another client's son received the top post in his school, these are all things that give me hope, that give me strength, that to know that, first of all, there are people who still want to make aliyah, and by the fact that we're helping them, they're not only living in Israel, but really being successful in Israel and making Israel a better place. The whole point of our organization and our work is to make Israel a better place. And the fact that we help people absorb into Israel and make Israel a more equal and or either maybe the better word is sensitive place, and people who understand the differences, and people who've struggled for themselves will hopefully be more sensitive to the needs of others. And we will keep doing that as part of the reform movement's Tikkun Olam, and hopefully that will make Israel a better place for all of us. That definitely gives me strength to keep going. Thanks, and good evening, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Nicole. So I introduce you to our the person who's been with us for the longest. I also wanted to introduce you to our newest employee, who is Ofer Erez, who just came in almost a year ago to manage our public policy work. And Ofer, please share with us what you're focusing on and what your vision is for Iraq.
Thank you. So I joined Iraq without even knowing much about the reform movement. I'll be honest with you. I grew up in a kibbutz in Israel, which is probably the most secular, non-religion kind of atmosphere you can find, and I needed to go all the way to the US, to LA, in order to walk into a synagogue where I first felt comfortable. I was around 21 years old, and I realized this is because it's a reform synagogue where women and men are not separated, where pride flag, rainbow flag is hanged with, pride. And I realized that for Israel to be a true democratic and a Jewish state, it can only exist under one condition: if all Jews would be able to feel equal and welcome here. And Iraq and the reform movement apparently has been doing this work for the last more than 30 years. So I was honored to join, as Noah said, almost a year ago. I joined an existent work but kind of a new department. The public work and the public policy has been going on ever since the center was founded. But in my specific work, I'm trying to see how can we work with the public and with the parliament and with government offices in order to create change. Change can be from bottom up, working with the public, with communities, with local struggles, with struggles of the LGBTQ community or new immigrants or any other community who struggle, as Orly mentioned, also Orthodox women in Bet Shemesh. So I'm trying to work with the public in one hand in order to nourish political activism, all sorts of civil engagement around our life here in the context of how does Judaism affect our life? And you will be surprised, because there is no separation between state and religion in Israel. You would find Judaism affecting our life, not necessarily in ways most of the public wants, as, for example, public transportation in weekends, in Shabbat. And so in my position, I'm doing that. And the other way is working with public officials, working with public offices around policy, and trying, as everybody else before me said, to promote policies that create an atmosphere where equality exists and Judaism of all kinds can coexist. Anything I've forgotten?
Thank you.
What makes me hopeful?
Yes.
What makes me hopeful is monitoring public opinion in Israel and seeing that, yes, we see polarization, as we see all around the world. But if you look deep in this polarization, you would also see a very big movement of people here in Israel from almost all across the political map who supports the separation of state and religion from a point of view where they understand that religion is not something you can force on someone, and that the only way to coexist is by just letting each person be her or himself or they. And so I'm also, I think, the youngest here in the panel, I think. And I look at the people my age and I see that conversation is happening. And it takes time and it takes a lot of work and a lot of engagement. But you see not only negative changes.
Thank you. So I want to start by referring to some of the great questions that that were raised on the comments. And if you have more questions or more thoughts, please share them. So one was thinking about from Rabbi Leah, thinking about the past 5 years, what would you describe as the greatest success for Jewish pluralism? I want each and every one of you to share that. I'll let you share two. I'm gonna also circle back to you so that you have to think about that as well. But let's start with Oli.
Well, I think not of just a legal success, but of a change in what happening in the ground. Basically, I think that being reform in Israel is, people know much more about the reform movement today than they have known a decade ago or 5 years ago. I think there is much more awareness. I think that when you say today to people the reform movement, they know a lot more what we're talking about, and they have much more positive views and identify the movement with the struggles we've mentioned. And I think that today we pose a real alternative to the Israeli public. And if you're looking on different surveys that the Reform Movement and other bodies have conducted in the past few years, we see that there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis who identify as Reform, and definitely more people that have gone to attended Reform weddings and Reform bar and bat mitzvahs. And I think this is a very important message to the Israeli public. You know, we're not only talking about there is more than one way to be Jewish, but people feel more at home and see this as a real alternative. And I think that being part of the movement, of course, brings you also closer to the idea of social justice, of equality, of pluralism, of tolerance. And so I think it's a major change in Israeli public and society.
Thank you. Nikki? Hold on, you're still on mute.
Okay, now I'm muted.
No,
I would agree with Orly. One of my other tasks that I have as part of the reform movement is to prepare prenuptial agreements for those people who decide to marry either in a non-orthodox way or in a civil way that isn't necessarily non-orthodox, but it's definitely not within the framework of the rabbinate. And in the last 5 years, the amount of work that I have on that field, the number of couples who come and want to have an alternative wedding in Israel, they're first of all aware that the reform movement offers the services, they're aware that the reform movement does marriages, and they want to get away from the rabbinate. And the number of couples, and these aren't just couples who can't get married in the rabbinate, these aren't reform couples, these aren't reform converts who are or non-Jewish people, these are people who could quite happily get married in the rabbinate and probably would have been married 10 years ago. And in the last 5 years, we've seen a huge increase in the number of young people. Like as Ofer was saying, the young people in the country are saying, we don't want the Orthodox monopoly anymore. We want a country that has more social freedoms. And that's, I would say that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen in the last 5 years.
Thank you. Anat?
I would like to mention that the fact that Orthodox women turn to the reform movement to make changes in policy is quite extraordinary. I think the bravest feminists I know in Israel today are Orthodox women. I believe in women as social agents, as socializing agents and agents of social change. And I think orthodoxy is going to change. I think the rabbis are extremely worried about this. This is why they are restraining their women, policing their bodies and their voices, but it ain't gonna work. They're on the march and orthodoxy is going to change. The rabbis are right to be nervous. Women are going to change the empire that was built, the patriarchal empire of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel.
Ophel?
So I will maybe continue and not here and say that I believe that not only Orthodox women, ultra-Orthodox women are going to lead the change, but also from my former my position before getting to Iraq was the executive director of Jerusalem Open House for Pride and Tolerance. And because I am new to Iraq, I can tell you about my experience and there and our biggest achievement that I was a part of. And this is the Jerusalem March for Pride and Tolerance that Iraq has been protecting and fighting for and paving the way for the last, I think ever since, I think I'm not from the first one, leading the Jerusalem Open House in general and specifically the march that is being organized as a protest in Jerusalem by the non-profit, by the Jerusalem Open House. One of the most amazing things that you can see maybe only in Jerusalem, is this amazing, happy, huge group of Orthodox LGBTQ plus people marching together with pride, holding the signs of "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," love thy neighbor, of Iraq, and the movement, and seeing that the fact that the Reform movement is fighting for pluralism in Israel is paving the way for Orthodox LGBTQ people to manifest their right where is the most important to them. If you ask anyone, they will say they don't care about the Tel Aviv Pride Parade and the parties. They care about the march in Jerusalem. And thanks to Iraq work, it started, and unfortunately, up until now, up until this year, each and every year there is a need of legal aid and sometimes even petitions against the municipality of Jerusalem or against the police in Jerusalem in order to allow the march to happen. So this is their achievement, and in the last year, I feel like I was also a bit of part of it.
Noah?
What?
What happened to Noah?
So in the meantime, until Noah connects, I believe I'm the last one remaining. Let me share with you a little story. I'm a cardiologist, as I said, and much of my team in the hospital is made up of ultra-Orthodox echo technicians. And in the beginning, when they knew that, and I never hiding it, that I'm a Reform Jew, Reform would be more of a problem, more of a derogatory term. More and more, as the years went by, Reform became part of the solution. So I began hearing questions from my team. Well, how would your rabbi, and I did never hear that my rabbi was a female rabbi, how would your rabbi solve this problem? And how would you address her to ask this kind of question, you being a man? And the top of it was one of my technicians who had very serious marital problems, was ultra-Orthodox, and her husband was becoming more and more extreme, asked if I could connect her to my rabbi, so she could consult the halakhic way of trying to stop her husband from becoming an extremist. And I believe that the change in narrative in the Israeli public from the Reform and other pluralistic solutions to Judaism, coming from being a problem and a derogatory term to part of the solution, I think this is one of the greatest achievements of pluralistic Judaism, the Reform movement, and Iraq in Israel.
Thank you, Onan. I'm sorry I missed the beginning of your answer because of technical problems. I will also share my thoughts. I think that all of us around the world are experiencing a very worrying time in terms of the threats on democracy. Around the world, democracies are becoming weaker and anti-democratic trends are becoming stronger. And I think that in the past few years, in the work of Iraq, we've managed to stop one of the major threats to democracy, which is extreme right policies overtaking the center right. So 5 years ago or 10 years ago, ideas, racist ideas, extremist ideas were filtering into the center right, which is center right is essential to democracy. And through our work in the past 3 years, we've managed to not only bar extremists from getting into the Knesset, but we've also managed to shift the discourse so that the center right is now rejecting those extremist, racist, nationalistic elements. And I think that that is a huge success and a huge pillar that we can start from to build on that and strengthen the Israeli democracy. I will move to a question from our friend Gary Perlin, who says that he's had the privilege of being with IRAC in Beit Shemesh and see our connection to others, Orthodox, who are fighting for religious freedom. And what can we do to replicate that in other communities? Oh, and the question is on the screen. Oli, Ofer, do you have any ideas on that?
Well, I think we are, of course, we want to have cooperation with different groups and sectors. Unfortunately, oftentimes when we're talking about Orthodox or even ultra-Orthodox, there is reluctance on their part to cooperate with us. And sometimes we have to build those connections very, very slowly. In the Shemesh, this happened through this very unique group of brave women we got in touch with. We've had some more connections, but they were more behind the scenes. I think that up until now, outright cooperation between the Reform movement and ultra-Orthodox, even some Orthodox factors, is still problematic. But we hopefully in a couple, and maybe in 5 or 10 years, this will be something that is different. We do have different coalitions that we are part of. We have a coalition for fighting exclusion of women, and this coalition we have ultra-Orthodox women, and we sort of think that sort of brainstorm together. But again, it's sort of more behind the scenes effort, I think.
I believe that when we look at our potential partners, we should look, and this is exactly what IRAC is doing for the last 30 years, is looking to all groups, as you wrote, to all groups who fight for religious freedom. It can be Orthodox who fight for their freedom, or LGBTQ, people in a specific city who feel like in their city they're being pushed or discriminated because of not because of, but using Judaism as an excuse to discriminate. So what we are trying to do is to find the common ground, or the common, I forgot the other word, denominator, with other groups, and try to promote the work that we all believe in and we can agree on together. I think the Beit Shemesh example is one of the most optimistic one, because it's maybe the less predictable, and yet I see more and more people from places you wouldn't think of. For example, very right-wing parties, or very right, or if nationalist, Orthodox, Dati Leumi, people who can support the idea of pluralistic Judaism. And so finding those groups and making the connection, I think, is the way I'm trying to go.
Thank you. And Nicole? Hold on, Nicole is still muted. There you
muted. Thanks. What I would also like to point out is that on the conversion issue, we have great cooperation with modern Orthodox groups, because they're also, anyone who's outside of the Orthodox rabbinate finds that there is room to work together. We've worked together with the team, which is a modern Orthodox organization, to try and stymie the Orthodox conversion bills. We're working together with modern Orthodox movements all of whom are interested in a pluralistic Judaism and know that we're the address, we're the organization who deals with fighting for religious pluralism and fighting for the recognition of all conversion that is not dominated by the rabbinate. So they're all happening all the time, and those links are getting stronger all the time.
Thank you. So the last question that we'll take is from our friend Menachem Leibovich, who's asking, what are your priorities for the next 5 years? Just briefly, we only have a few more minutes, so just briefly, each one of you.
I can.
Let's go, Nikki.
Okay, my goal for the next 5 years is that you won't need me after 5 years. It would be wonderful that we fight for the law of return to be fully implemented in the way that I think the state of Israel expected it to be implemented when they drew up the Declaration of Independence that Ronen read right at the beginning. And I really hope that in the next 5 years, the struggles that we see from so many new immigrants, whether it's on the conversion scene or in general, will really fade away, and that Israel will be more successful on its immigration front, so that people like Iraq can put their energies other places and not necessarily on these ones. So that would be a dream for the next 5 years.
I don't think we're letting you go, but okay. I don't want to delegitimize your dream. I'm not.
I think in the next 5 years, we need to fight racism. I think the fact that in the Jewish state, racism seems to be tolerated right now is an anathema to everything that we could possibly believe in forming a Jewish state in Israel. And the racists right now are enjoying a policy of a blind eye and a deaf ear, and we must wake up Israel to it's shocking that we need to remind Jews the perils and what a terrible disease racism is. So I think we need to eradicate racism.
Oh, sorry, Oli. Go ahead, Oli.
I just want to join Renat. I think the issue of racism, we still have so much to do. I spoke earlier about how Israeli public opinion has changed in so many issues we're dealing with, but on the issue of racism, we still have, I think, a lot to do on issues such as racial profiling and phenomena which are really part of being an Israeli Arab on a daily basis. And also, I think the Israeli democracy, like Noah mentioned before, is very fragile, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to do about defending Israel's democracy, defending the Supreme Court against attempts to curtail its authorities, and of course, continuing to fight for freedom of religion and true equality for the movement.
Thank you. Ronen.
Thank you. I really want to continue what Orly said. I think that's one part of the conversation I had with Noah from the start, is that I believe that organizations such as Iraq, and Iraq in particular, should adapt itself to function in a less democratic society. And unfortunately, NGOs like Iraq rely on democracy and the democratic tools to promote whichever ideals they're promoting. In our case, the fight against racism, the fight for religious equality. And unfortunately, Israeli society is becoming less and less democratic. And unfortunately, we need to resort to finding tools to continue functioning and do all this great work you heard about in a less democratic society. I'm sad to say it, but I understand in my inner being that this is a profound challenge that we should face in the next few years.
Thank you. So I will join in saying that, first of all, I want to thank you for everything that you've said in the chat. We had a very difficult staff meeting today as our staff is facing another lockdown, and the pressure of work is just getting bigger, and all of our children are at home, and we're trying to balance everything. So the warm words that you were offering will go a long way in strengthening us as we move forward. And And I want to echo what Oli and Ronen have said, but also I think that these are such earth-shattering times that are also an opportunity. And in Israel, we're seeing new coalitions building and new movements for change. And the reactions to threats on democracy today is so different and so much stronger than it was 3 years ago. And I think it's up to us to figure out how we fit into that big democratic front that is now forming in Israel, that is from the right and from the left, from the seculars and from others, from and we have a lot to give in that front, and seeing how we can move that forward. And just to go back to the beginning and to the words of hope from Oli and from Nicole and from Ronen, I want to remind us all that with the great achievements that we've achieved so far, the Israeli government still invests about 3 billion shekels a year in the Orthodox establishment, and currently spends, I would say, something between 8 to 10 million in the non-Orthodox movements and organizations. And this is where you all come in helping us as we work, and it's a very long road ahead to get equality for our movement. We need your help in bridging the gap for our movement so that the movement can continue to succeed as it has so far, and continue to grow and thrive until we reach the equality that we're working for in the Knesset and in the courts. So thank you all for your efforts. I know that the Congress is not easy. I know that it's frustrating, but we are so grateful for your help and for your support and for your friendship. And we wish you the best of luck in the Congress.